Okay, welcome everybody. This is part 2 and the conclusion of Micha's idol, Pesel Micha, it's known as. We've spent a few weeks doing this. I didn't think we'd spend quite so long, but it's turned out to be a very interesting topic with digressions into Moshe's grandson and why it was that he might have gone off the derech, digressions into Brit Milah, and all sorts of interesting things. So David is going to finish off this subject tonight, and then on Sunday we will start the next chapter, which is a X-rated chapter. The story is called Pilegesh Begivah, the concubine in Givah. It would make a great film because it has everything. It has sex, violence, war, all sorts of things, civil war even. So it would make a great film or a book, but we've only got one chapter. It'll probably take us a few weeks, and I'm probably going to interrupt actually, because I'll probably do in Chodesh Elul, I will probably do a Yom Kippur, a pre-Yomim Noraim series. So we might have to interrupt Pilegesh Begivah in the middle. But nevertheless, we'll make a start on Sunday. So, David, over to you. Pesel Micha.
Okay.
I'll share the screen. What do you want me to share? Do you want me to share the source sheet or the text to start with?
The source sheets, please. The combined one that I sent you earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And would someone like to volunteer in place of Leon, who I don't think is with us at the moment, as our reader for this evening?
Avril, I just volunteered you to be the reader.
Thanks, Johnny. Before Avril accepts that nomination, I should point out, just like last time, that there is a health warning. This year is not for the faint-hearted or those with a nervous disposition, almost from the start. So with that in mind, let's first of all summarize where we got to date. We started off, we dated the event of Pesel Micha. We explained why it appears at the end of Sefer Shoftim, even though it actually occurs at the time of the beginning of Sefer Shoftim. We traced the origin of Micha himself, his name, what his name meant, and his previous form. We had a look at other places in Tanakh where there were suspended letters and concluded that there was absolutely nothing to conclude with. There's no connection between this and the other three cases. We learned about the motivation of Moshe's grandson, Yehonatan. We looked at the different names that we found for him later on in Tanakh and what eventually happened to him. We learned a little bit about the commentator, the Baal Haturim, and his commentary on the Torah, which probably gives us more information on Pesel Micha than any other commentary. We connected the Avodat Zarah of Moshe's in-laws with our story, Pesel Micha, from the word Ulechohen, which appears only 3 times, once in connection with Moshe and Zipporah, and twice in Judges chapter 17. We suggested that Moshe was punished by having an idol-worshipping grandchild on account of a covenant that he made with his father-in-law, which was conditional, which was a condition of his marrying Zipporah, and we're going to develop that further this evening. We looked at how Moshe halachically was able to marry a Midianite woman. We scratched the surface to link the stories of Amalek, which appears at the end of the end of Parashat B'Shalach, and the Yitro story, which follows straight on. We noticed several linguistic similarities between the Exodus story and Shoftim chapters 17 and 18. The number 600, for example, the idol being at Yam Suf, the ephod, the golden calf, Micha's Chabad house, and the way that Shevet Dan placed their children, cattle, and their household goods. And we ended up on Sunday discussing how and why the Shevet Dan were attacked by Amalek in the Midbar. And we linked the Amalek and Yitro stories that follow immediately on one from another. And this was a possible explanation, we said, for the violent behavior of Shimshon and the behavior of Shevet Dan in our story. And there's a possibility that when we read right at the end on Sunday what actually happened to Shevet Dan, how they were castrated by Amalek and what Amalek did to their castrated parts, to show Hashem in Shomayim that the protection of the fire by night and the cloud during the day offered Shevet Dan no protection whatsoever, and that Shevet Dan were punished for the Avodat Zarah that they participated in the Midbar. So that's where we left it. And I thought, to start off with this evening, I'd add a couple of additional sources, because we read about the instance of Amalek twice in the Torah. At the end of Parashat B'Shalach is the actual account of what happens. And at the end of Parashat Ki Teitzei is the positive mitzvah, both to destroy and to eradicate Amalek on account of what they did. And we looked at the interpretations, particularly of the Baal Haturim on this, which linked what happened to Dan with various gematrias and other methods. Now, when we read Parashat, the end of Parashat B'Shalach twice during the year, once on the actual parasha itself, Shabbat Shirah. Second time we'll read from the end of the parasha on Purim morning. Similarly, Parashat Zachor is read in Shul at the end of Parashat Ki Teitzei in a few weeks' time, and also on the Shabbat before Purim, Shabbat Zachor, and the link is obvious. The Haftarah that's read on Shabbat Zachor, I've quoted from here in source number 32. And here again is a nice plug for Johnny's share, because in not too many weeks' time, Johnny will be taking us through Sefer Shemuel. And one of the most famous stories in Sefer Shemuel is how the author of our book of Judges, which is very important to park that, we actually get the opportunity of fulfilling this mitzvah of eradicating Amalek, which was one of the 3 mitzvot that Bnei Yisrael had to accomplish when they moved into Eretz Yisrael. And the first king of Eretz Yisrael, who Shemuel very reluctantly anoints, i.e. Shaul, is given the opportunity of fulfilling this mitzvah, and he fails miserably, to the extent that he keeps Agag, the king of Amalek, alive after defeating his army in battle. But instead of killing him, executing him as commanded by the prophet Shemuel, he keeps him alive long enough for him to sire children. And unfortunately, we know only too well the result of Shaul's failure, which started with Haman and continues right to today. So, Avril, if you'd like to just read a couple of the Pesukim here in chapter 1 of Shemuel Aleph, chapter 15 of Shemuel Aleph. verses 32 to 33. So Shaul has failed in his mission, and Shmuel now is stepping in to do what the king should have done, Avril. I think you're going to need to unmute, Avril. Thank you.
Okay. Samuel said, "Bring forward to me King Agag of Amalek." Agag approached him with faltering steps, and Agag said, "Ah, bitter death is at hand." Samuel said, "As your sword has bereaved women, so shall your mother be bereaved among women." And Samuel cut Agag down before the Lord at Gilgal. Okay.
The next source I bring in, number 33, is a Midrash called the Midrash Tanchuma. It's named after a Tana by the name of Tanchuma bar Abba, lived in around the 4th century of this era. And the Midrash is a compilation of various thoughts, probably compiled in around the 9th century. Rashi uses Midrash Tanchuma a lot in his explanations. We've already touched on a couple of them on Sunday. Now, Midrash Tanchuma takes out what Shmuel actually did. Vayishasef Shmuel is what the Navi actually says. And the normal translation of Vayishasef is cutting into pieces. And this, again, is another plug for Johnny, for what we're going to be talking about starting this Sunday. You're going to feel a little bit more cut up, because the Midrash goes into various explanations, various gory explanations of what Shmuel did to Agag. And in number 33, Avril, sorry to put this on you, this is one of the interpretations given by Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi, Rebbe.
Okay, thank you. Where was that promising not to embarrass me, Johnny? Rabbi said, "He castrated him, as stated." But Samuel said, "As your sword has made women bereaved, so shall your mother be bereaved among women." Rabbi Levi said, "Moses also gave a hint to Israel in the Torah about Agag's castration."
Okay, stop there a second, Avril, because here's a connection that I'd never seen before. Have a look at number 34, which is Devarim chapter 25, immediately before Parashat Zachor, the commandment to remember and eradicate Amalek. And have a look there, Avril, if you don't mind reading that. Again, apologies that John has put this on you, but just read what it says there. It's a halacha.
Which one, number 11?
Yeah, please. Item source 34, verse 11 and 12.
Yeah. If two men get into a fight with each other, and the wife of one comes up to save her husband from his antagonist, and puts out her hand and seizes him by his genitals, you shall cut off her hand and show no pity.
Okay, let me state right away here that the Torah does not take this literally, doesn't mean literally to cut off her hand. It's the same as in Parashat Mishpatim, ayin tachat ayin, monetary compensation for the loss that she's caused. So even though her intention was to save her husband from a very, very nasty accident, which would have required a visit to Laniado, unfortunately, she's still liable financially to pay damages to the person that she attacked, even though she was trying to protect her husband. So go back to the Midrash now and what Rabbi Levi says.
Rabbi Levi said, Moses also gave a hint to Israel in the Torah about Agag's castration, since it stated, when two men get into a fight with each other and the wife of one draws near to to save her husband from the hand of the one smiting him, if she puts out with her hand and grabs the other man by his genitals, then you shall cut off her hand. What is written after that in verses 17? Remember what Amalek did to you. Israel said to the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the world. Are you telling us to remember?
Okay, thanks. I think we've had enough of that now, but fascinating connection. And again, take this back as the punishment for Shevet Dan for their Avodat Zarah in the Midbar. Let's move on. Fascinating. We've almost dismissed Moshe's family because of the incident that's taken place back in the covenant that appears to have been made between him and his father-in-law. And I had a question. There are 3 sources in the Torah, very, very relevant sources, number 14, 15, and 16, Johnny, if you don't mind, where we're given a family history. So number 14, I don't need you to read here, Avril, because it's very simple. We can go through this very, very quickly. The first source, at the beginning of Parashat Va'era, in Shani there, where Moshe has been told by Hashem, I'm God. He gives him the 4 expressions of redemption, and then he's told to go and take Aaron with him and meet Paro for what appears to be the second time. And at that stage, the Torah digresses and gives the family history of Moshe and Aharon. And you can see I put in bold, Vaikach Aaron et Elisheva bat Aminadav achot Nachshon lo leisha. So who Aaron takes as a wife? Vateled lo et Nadav et Avihu et Elazar et Itamar. Where's Moshe? Or better still, because Moshe is there in the first pasuk, Vateled lo et Aaron et Moshe. But where's Moshe's wife and children? No mention at all, totally oblivious. Source number 15, at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, where the children of Israel are counted in the wilderness for the first time. Ve'ele toledot Aaron and Moshe beyond Dibar Hashem et Moshe b'Har Sinai. Eile shemot b'nei Aaron, Habakkuk, Nadav, etc., etc. Can you see anything about the B'nai Moshe? Nothing. Totally ignored. Then finally, in item 16, at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, where they're counted in the 40th year, these are the people who have survived the 38 and a half years after the first Tisha B'Av in the wilderness. And God said, we're going to count the Bnei Israel again. And here is the census of the tribe of Levi. So it goes back with the Shemesh Amram, Yocheved bat Levi, Asher Yaldo, Tala Levi, Mitzrayim, Vateli Amram, et Aaron, et Moshe, et Miriam. So there's the parents, they're the children. Vayivadlel li Aaron, et Nadav, et Avihu, et Elazar, et Itamar. Where's Moshe's wife and children? Nowhere to be found. Very interestingly, immediately following on from this parasha is the parasha of Benot Salaf about the daughters of Salaf who will inherit their father's possessions and be entitled to a place in Eretz Yisrael. And at that point, Moshe wishes, according to a Midrash, that his children, his sons, will have a chelek in Eretz Yisrael, and they will be able to succeed him. What happens immediately after that in Parashat Pinchas? Hashem tells Moshe, go up to Har Havarim. Your children are not going to inherit anything from you. Why? Because you never sat down and studied Torah with them. Similar to what Johnny was suggesting last week. And immediately Hashem says to Moshe, appoint Yehoshua as your successor, not your children. Just think back again to the author of the story of Pesel Micha. It's Shmuel. And we're going to learn, or John is going to teach us very shortly, about Shmuel's son. Shmuel also had 2 sons, and they never succeeded him either for various reasons. Maybe that's something we need to think about. Finally, source 17 in this particular section, source we won't be familiar with because it's Divrei Hayamim. But again, Uvnei Amram, Aaron, and Moshe, and Miriam, Uvnei Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, Itamar. Nothing about the sons of Moshe. It's as if they didn't exist.
David, it's interesting. There's nothing about the children of Miriam either.
Nothing about the children of Miriam. Why? Because they're only alluded to in the Midrash. And maybe you could say that the Torah isn't being politically correct here. It's only following the children of the male line.
Although Miriam married Hur.
Correct, but that's not explicit from the Torah. It's only from Torah Shebaal Peh. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I would add there is one reference in Torah Shebaal Peh to Gershom being in the Midbar. And I might get back to that before we finish. Okay, so we know now where Moshe's children aren't mentioned. We looked at a source on Sunday where they are mentioned. Just before we get there, there's also another story, of course, something else that we can ask. Why weren't Moshe's sons, Gershom and Eliezer, entitled to be Kohanim? They were from Shevet Levi. We've got the mention here of Aaron's sons, and we know from various Pesukim in the Torah, most famously in Parashat Shemini, how they served as priests in the Mishkan. Why aren't Gershon and Eliezer priests? And I've got 2 possible interpretations, both of which are not particularly pleasant. The first one particularly. First suggestion is a famous Midrash that says that Moshe's parents, Amram and Yocheved, divorced. When Paro made the Gezerah to kill the Jewish children, they decided it wouldn't be a good idea for them to stay married. Then when we get to the second Perek of Shemot, Vayelech ish mibeit Levi, vayikach et bat Levi, they appear to remarry. If that's the case, a Cohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee, even if the divorcee was his original wife. As we learned in the Gemarah shir with Johnny a few weeks ago, the result of a Kohen married to a Gerusha, a divorcee, is that the children and any seed from that, they're perfectly halachically Jewish, but they're no longer entitled to any of the privileges of Kohanim. They're called a halal. Therefore, according to this explanation, Gershom and Eliezer were halalim, and therefore that disqualified them from being Kohanim. Very interesting. However, the Abarbanel gives another explanation. They were banned because of who their mother was. Okay, their mother.
Can I ask a question, David?
Sure.
Can I ask a question on your first explanation?
Yeah, sure.
So what you're suggesting in the first explanation is that Amram married a divorcee, which was his own wife, Yocheved.
Yeah.
And thereafter begot Moshe.
Yeah.
Having already given birth to Aaron and Miriam before they divorced.
Yes.
Okay. So therefore, if Amram
therefore Aaron was kosher.
Aaron was kosher, and Moshe would be a halal.
Yes.
How do you then explain the fact that in the first 8 days of the Mishkan's existence, Moshe acted as the Kohen and did all the service in the Mishkan exactly as a Kohen would do it. Surely he would have been disqualified from that as a Kohen Halal.
Yeah, very good question, Johnny. There is a Gemara that deals with it, and there's a machlokes amongst the Mefarshim whether Moshe actually acted as specified in Parashat Shemini and as what was commanded to him in Parashat Tetzaveh. But yeah, very good issue, a very important issue that you've raised.
I suppose what you could say was that if you think about it, when you roll out a new venture, you'd have a pilot study first.
Yeah.
And maybe Moshe's 8 days didn't count really. It was a dummy run, and therefore, if it was a dummy run, then it wouldn't matter that he wasn't a kosher Kohen, he was a Kohen Halal. I suppose you could answer it that way. It's not brilliantly satisfactory, but at least it's an answer.
Okay. And if you're not happy with that answer, you've also got the answer of the Abba Brunel, who said they were disqualified on account of who his mother was, which is where we're going now. So, having seen where Moshe's wife and children aren't mentioned, let's look at the sources now. They're the critical sources in the Torah where they are mentioned. So we've already dealt last week with source 18. I think we discussed that as much as we need to. Which talks about where Moshe first meets Tzipporah, the circumstances of him meeting Tzipporah. So let's go now to source number 20. And this is one of the most difficult stories in the whole Torah to understand. There's so much ambiguity going on. There's so many pronouns being used. We don't know which son is being referred to. In fact, the very 6th word, it said ve'et banav, that Moshe took his sons. But by this stage, we've only heard about one Gershom. We know nothing about the other one. Some words that really trouble us, and this is going to be again critical to our understanding of where Moshe fits in. So Avril, can you, if you wouldn't mind, verse 20 there in number 20.
So Moses took his wife and sons, mounted them on an ass, and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God with him. And the Lord said to me,
go straight to Pasuk 24 now.
At a night encampment on the way, the Lord encountered him and sought to kill him.
Okay, that's very ambiguous. Is Hashem trying to kill Moshe or trying to kill someone else? Yeah, carry on please, Avril.
So Tzipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his legs with it, saying, "You are truly a bridegroom of blood to me." And when he let
stop there, Johnny. Is a woman allowed to perform Brit Milah?
You're muted.
Sorry. Yes. Al pi halacha, a woman is allowed to do a circumcision. It isn't done. It isn't the done thing, but if a woman was to come and do a Brit Milah, it would be a kosher Brit Milah, and it would not need to be done again, as it were, or have a hatafat dam Brit, a mohelet, which is the feminine version of mohel, is allowed to do a Brit al pi halacha. But as my rabbi in Manchester used to say, don't tell anybody I said that.
Okay, and it is totally contrary to the halacha as brought down by the Gemara in Avodah Zorah, but there are long discussions in the Rishonim and Acharonim about it.
So why,
in extenuating circumstances.
So why are women rabbis frowned upon? If a woman can be a moel, why can't she be a rabbi?
What's the connection?
I think that
Connection, woman. That's the connection.
I think that Rav Ido brought all this up in the shir that he gave to the ladies on Rosh Chodesh. And he said we can be rabbis and we can do Brit Milah, if I remember correctly.
Okay, let's have a look and see what the Gemara says and how the Gemara interprets what's going on. Item 35, a Gemara in Nedarim. Yeah. Avril, would you mind reading for us again, please?
No problem. It is taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korha says, so great is the mitzvah of circumcision that all the merits that Moses our teacher accrued when he performed mitzvot did not protect him when he was negligent about performing the mitzvah of circumcision.
Okay, Moshe is going to be proved here to be negligent in performing the brit of his son. What's going on here? He's just checked into the inn, and instead of getting the brit done straight away, Zerizim Makdimim the mitzvah, is why we should perform the brit as soon as possible on the 8th day as possible. And what appears to be going on here is Moshe is in a conversation with the innkeeper trying to negotiate an upgrade to the presidential suite. Read on.
As it is stated, and the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, heaven forbid that Moses our teacher was neglectful of the mitzvah of circumcision. Rather, this is what he said. If I circumcise the child now and depart to begin my journey, it is a danger for the child, as it is stated. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, when they were in pain, which indicates that the pain of circumcision lasts for several days and the child may be in danger while in pain. If I circumcise him immediately and wait 3 days and only then embark on the journey, this is problematic, as the Holy One, blessed be he, said to me, go, return to Egypt, go immediately. For these reasons, Moses did not circumcise the child immediately, but no neglect existed on his part. But according to this explanation, for what reason was Moses punished? Because he was occupied with lodging first and did not immediately perform the mitzvah of circumcision, as it is stated. And it came to pass on the way at the lodging place.
Okay, so Moshe is punished. He's negligent because he should have been involved in the Brit Milah immediately. Now have a look at the next source, which is number 36, immediately below, and see what the Baal Haturim has to say about it. To understand this Baal Haturim, what I forgot to print out here is the very next story in the Torah following this incident, where Moshe meets Aharon. And the Torah uses exactly the same word, Vayifkashehu, and he encountered him. And says the Baal Haturim here, there are only 2 mentions of this word, Vayifkashehu, in the whole of Tanakh. Here and in a couple of psukim time when Moshe meets Aharon. And there's a very, very important reason why. Says the Baal Haturim, same as what we've just heard above, that Moshe was negligent in delaying the Milah. And these 2 angels called Af and Chema came to swallow Moshe up. And he wasn't able to prevail against them until Aharon came. Vayifkashehu, so he's matching these 2 Vayifkashehu. And what's Aharon's job there, according to the Baal Haturim? Uvizchuto nitzel. On Aharon's merit, Moshe was saved. So the interpretation, according to both the Gemara in Nedarim and the Baal Haturim, is that the object, the person that Hashem sought to kill was Moshe. Why? Because he was negligent in performing the Brit Milah of his son. Who came to save him? Zipporah didn't do the Milah. Aharon did it. And it was Zipporah who knew that she couldn't do the Milah. She got her brother-in-law to do it for her. Okay, and that fits in nicely with the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says that a woman is not able to perform Brit Milah. But now look at source number 37. Totally different interpretation. Avril, again, the same Gemara, the very next line of the Gemara in Nedarim.
Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, it was not Moses, our teacher, that Satan wanted to kill, but rather that infant who was not circumcised, as it is stated, surely a bridegroom of blood you are to me.
Okay, and I've highlighted in the Hebrew that it wasn't Moshe that the Malach wanted to kill, it was Zipporah's son, Zipporah Moshe's son. Why did Hashem want to kill Gershom? Because it was part of the covenant that had been made with Moshe as part of their marriage and with Yitro, that the first child to be born would be brought up in the Midianite religion and would not get Brit Milah. Any subsequent children would be brought up in the Jewish religion. For that reason, Hashem decides not to kill Moshe, but to kill Moshe's son. Who intervenes? Zipporah. Zipporah suddenly realizes, surely a bridegroom of blood you are to me, that you're going to kill my son on account of this covenant that I've made not to give him a Brit Milah. Therefore, I've got to save the child and I've got to cancel that covenant. Have a look now in item 38, which is Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, a very, very early source. We can date this to the very early Mishnaic period. Yonatan is more than just a translation. Yonatan will fit in various very, very ancient explanations of Tanakh. So it's a very, very important commentator, not just translator. And
can I just take you back a sec? I'm sorry to cut you off in full flow, as it were.
Yeah.
But I'm very confused about this Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says Aaron did the Brit Milah. Because the words say, and this is, I'm quoting from the Torah, from Parashat Shemot,
yeah,
Perek Daled, chapter 4, verse 25.
Yeah.
Vatikach Tzipporah, and Tzipporah took
Vatichrot, yeah,
a flint or rock, Vatichrot, it's in the feminine form,
agreed.
And she cut et orlat bana, the foreskin of her son.
Okay.
So how can the Gemara say that Aaron did it? I don't understand that. It's
Johnny,
spoken very clearly.
What bracha does the father make on the Milah, even though he has given the mitzvah to you as a mohel?
So he will make, I'll say al hamila, and he will say lahachnisa bivrita shel Avraham Avinu.
Okay. Okay. Accepted. Bear in mind, this is purely midrashic, and it's only found in the Baal Haturim by connecting this word by Yifkashehu.
No, I don't have a problem with that connection, because clearly that's a connection with the two words are the same. But I would suggest that it would be unusual for a Gemara to change the actual wording in the Torah. The wording in the Torah is in the feminine form. She cut it off, unless what the Gemara is saying is that Moshe was, I don't know, by this time unconscious because he'd been attacked by God or God's angels, and therefore Aaron came along and took over and then appointed Tzipporah as the Mohelet. But what you're telling me
I'd say it's the other way around, that she appointed him as her agent.
So she took up. Okay. So in effect, what the Gemara is saying is that when it says she cut off the foreskin, what it means is she appointed somebody else, i.e. Aaron, to do it on her behalf. Okay, I get it. Okay, that's a good answer. All right. Okay. Sorry to have interrupted you there.
No, pleasure. So let's look at what Targum Yonatan says here. Avril.
But it was on the way in the place of lodging that the angel of the Lord met him and sought to kill him, because Gershom his son had not been circumcised, inasmuch as Jethro his father-in-law had not permitted him to circumcise him, but Eliezer had been circumcised by an agreement between them two.
Okay, and this is the first source that you'll find, the earliest source, and as I said, it's very, very ancient. Yonatan ben Uziel was a student of Hillel Hazaken. So we're dating Yonatan ben Uziel to around the beginning of this era, the beginning of the Common Era. Okay, so he's the first one to suggest that there's this covenant that Yitro forces Moshe into in order to benefit from the alliance between him and someone who had a very close alliance with Egypt, from whom Moshe was subject to the death penalty at that time. Moshe comes very much to regret this. So now let's look at the final source where Moshe, Tzipporah, Gershom, and Eliezer are explicitly mentioned in the Torah, which is sources 21 to 24. And again, this will be familiar to us because Johnny explained this text to us a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to explain it slightly differently. Okay, Avril. The beginning of Parashat Yitro, which we're probably all quite familiar with.
Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out from Egypt.
Okay,
so
stop there a second, Avril. So the chronology here is, after the story at the inn, Tzipporah and her children go back to Egypt. They don't witness the miracles of the 10 plagues. They don't witness Yetziat Mitzrayim. They don't witness Kriyat Yam Suf. Partially an explanation for why the kids go off the rails. Had they seen what everyone else saw, maybe they'd have stayed on the derech. Maybe they'd have sat down and learned Torah with their grandfather. With their father. Okay. The critical verse is verse 2.
So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Tzipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent home.
Okay, and I've highlighted in Hebrew, after she had been sent home. There's another meaning to being sent home. Have a look at source 22. Someone marries a woman, and if he finds that she's unfavorable in his eyes, then he writes for her a get, Sefer Keritut, v'chatavla, v'natan biyada. And even today, when there's a get, if a get is given by a husband to his wife, it has to be delivered into her hand. And then v'shilacha, the same word, he sends her out mibeto. It's a euphemism for divorce. What's gone on here? They're reunited. As Johnny said a couple of weeks ago, Moshe doesn't have time for his wife, for his kids. He goes straight into Yitro's tent and they have a coffee and a schmooze. Why? Because he's no longer married to her. He's divorced her because of what's happened. Item 23, source 23. Another very ancient source, the Mechilta. The Mechilta is the earliest halachic midrash that we find. A halachic midrash, as it says, is based on halachic issues that occur in the Torah and not storytelling. The Mechilta starts with Parashat Bo, with the first mitzvah given in the Torah, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, and goes through explanations of all the mitzvot in Sefer Shemot. And we can see how old it is because it's ascribed to Rabbi Yishmael. We know Rabbi Yishmael, the author of the 13 hermeneutical principles, a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva. So we can put this down to around the 1st century of the Common Era. So what Avril does the Mechilta, the Rabbi Yishmael, say about this?
And Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent. Rabbi Yehoshua says, after she had parted from him with a divorce, a get, it is written here, sending, and elsewhere, sending, just as there with a get, so here with a get.
Okay, so the passage above, the Mechilta uses a hermeneutical principle called Gezeirat Shav, that just where the V'shilacha in Devarim means to divorce, it means the same thing in the beginning of Parashat Yitro. Moshe has divorced Zipporah. Now look further on in the Mechilta. Rabbi Eliezer Hamodai.
Rabbi Elazar Hamodai says, in a land of foreign gods and idolatry, Moses said, since the whole world serves idolatry, I will serve him who spoke and brought the whole world into being. For when Moses said to Yitro, give me your daughter Zipporah as a wife, Yitro answered, if you do what I ask of you, I will give her to you as your wife. Moses, what do you ask? Yitro, your first son must serve idolatry. Thenceforward they may serve God in heaven. Moses accepted. Yitro swear, and he swore as it is written. Vayoel Moses, etc.
Okay, stop there, Avril. Vayoel Moshe. And as I explained on Sunday, this expression, Vayoel, comes from the word Allah, a covenant. We find this in later in Sefer Devarim, in Parashat Ki Tavo and Parashat Nitzavim. We also find the word Vayoel in Shoftim Peiret Yud Zalet. There's a Yud Zayin, another expression that's used in both of these sources and definitely connects the sources. So my final source now is number 24. Baal Haturim is going to put everything together for us. Just go down, up a bit. Thanks, Johnny. Okay. So if they're divorced, how can you call Zipporah Eshet Moshe, Moses' wife? That's the first question that the Baal Haturim is going to ask. And the Perush says, the Baal Haturim, he ishto. She is like his wife. Afal pi sheshilcha, even though she's been sent away, shemelech ein nosim gerushato. Someone who's married to a king can't get married again. Moshe is considered as a king. He's a prince of Egypt. And therefore, she's not entitled to marry. So it's as if, halachically, or in Egyptian law, she's still married. So that explains how you can say that she's divorced, but still Eshet Moshe. But now we're coming to the crux of the whole thing. In the passage that we read just above from Parashat Yitro, with Gershom, it's written Ki Amar Ger Hayiti B'Eretz Nochriya, to explain why he's called Gershom. When there's an explanation of Eliezer, Ki Elohei Avi B'Ezri Vayatzilein Mecheret Paro, the Torah doesn't say Ki Amar. So why is it only Ki Amar with Gershom and not with Eliezer? Says the Baal Haturim, Ve'ein ketiv kan Ki Amar ikalameima Ki Amar del Ka'e. Because Ki Amar refers to both Gershom and Eliezer. Al Gershom ketiv Ki Amar ki yesh derash b'midrash. Kashenatan Yitro b'to Moshe hutzrach lechatnot sheyeh ben harishon la'avodah zarah. As we've seen above, that this condition was the first son would be for avodat zarah. Ulechach, therefore, lo nimol ad shebga'o hamalach b'derech uvikesh lamito. He's only circumcised because of what happened at the inn, and the subject of who Hashem wants to kill isn't Moshe, it's Gershom. Who stops Gershom being killed? Tzipporah. As Malatot Tzipporah, then Tzipporah does the bris, and according to what we read before, Al Yedei Shaliach, she appoints someone to do it for her. Umachalolo Hatsanai Shehitna im Aviha. By doing that, it's severed the covenant that's been made with her father. So it's now batel. Lachein b'chan ketiv, therefore it's written there, Ki Amar, koloma ata nigleta, ata nigle, lakol ki anus haya al tanai hazer. Everything has been revealed that this covenant has now been annulled because of what's happened there. Ki ger haya, because he was a ger. V'hutzrach lasot ma'ama Yitro. What's Moses' motivation for getting into this covenant with Yitro? He's hoping he's going to turn Yitro to Avodat Hashem, which eventually does. Having said that, though, Umikol makom ne'enash al hatnai. Moshe is punished for the condition that he makes. Sheyatsa mimenu Yonatan. From him comes Yehonatan. Shenasa komel fesel Micha. And he becomes the priest to Micha, just like Moshe's father-in-law is the priest to Midian. Lachen lo ketiv ki amar al Eliezer. Therefore, ki amar doesn't refer to Eliezer. Ki lo haya rotze legalot sheharag et hanefesh v'ratza paro lahorgo. Because this has got nothing to do with why Paro wanted to kill Moshe. Eliezer is a totally different story. The crux of the whole thing, says the Baal Haturim, is that Moshe is punished for getting into this covenant with Yitro, by which means there'll be no Brit Milah. And if you were to continue both with the Mechilta that I brought before and the passage from Nadarim, which we read even earlier, the sections immediately after that, I think they're identical sections, talks in length about how important Brit Milah is and how under no circumstances can be Brit Milah can Brit Milah be annulled. That therefore finishes the story. But as Johnny asked me the other day, what's the maskana, what's the conclusion of everything that we've learned? Well, we could say it's important when our children get married, maybe to look into the family background of where they're marrying into. You know, do we use a shadchan? Definitely not. Do we employ a PI? More importantly, I think, if by adding this nun, which started the whole conversation, remember the nun in the word Menashe, to protect Moshe, if we've inserted that nun in order to protect Moshe's honor, haven't our discussions done the opposite by actually desecrating his memory? We've looked above at the parallels between Moshe and Shmuel, both who had two sons who wanted to succeed them. There's also a parallel between Moshe and Aaron. Moshe appears to have lost two sons who've gone off the derech. Aaron also loses two sons for being too close to the derech. Nadav and Avihu. We won't go down that for the moment, but maybe there's a connection there. I think what's very relevant is the huge price of leadership, as Johnny speculated a couple of weeks ago. The fact that Moshe is so involved in everything to do with Yetziat Mitzrayim. He neglects his children who are parked away in Midian anyway, and how important this was, what we heard from Johnny a couple of weeks ago, when he's at his son's Seder in Perth, and Johnny insists that his son has his children next to him rather than people from the community, because Johnny's grandsons are the priority to his son, who is the rabbi in Perth. That's a beautiful message. To see the comparison between Moshe and Aharon, because Moshe is the leader, because he's accused, as we saw on Sunday, with the incident at the end of Parashat Balak, where they're worshipping Baal Peor, he's accused of being related through marriage to Avodat Zarah. Whereas Aharon, who isn't involved in the same leadership as Moshe, when we compare the two, and in fact the next bit of Gemarah that John is going to do next week compares the two, and we learn from this that when Aharon died, the whole of Bnei Yisrael mourned for him. It says, Kol Bet Yisrael. When Moshe died, it was just Bet Yisrael mourned for him for 30 days. So I think there was a greater perception of love towards Aharon than there was towards Moshe. Why? Because of the price of leadership, the toll this took on Moshe, and how we know that once you become a leader, the quicker you rise, the quicker it is when you fall. I think one final thing to look at, very much comes out of a discussion I had with Johnny earlier in the week, that however great our leaders are or were, and there was no one greater than Moshe, Lo Kam B'Yisrael K'Moshe, Navi K'Moshe. We also have to recognize that as great as they are, they have imperfections, they have fallibility. And we compare a Moshe to the early Christian saints, who, as I said, are saints, never done anything wrong with in their lives. They're placed on a pedestal. And you see the books behind me there. What you won't see is any of these art scroll books, which tend to idolize, to make a saint out of certain latter day, in the last 100 or 200 year Rebbes, full of Rebbe stories that I would expect to find in places like the little Midrash says and the Midrash says. And we have a tendency, unfortunately, to place our great leaders on this pedestal. And I bring Johnny in here to relay this, something that really aggravated me earlier in the week. This terrible criticism on Chief Rabbi Mervis. Johnny, if you just want to come in here.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you saw this. Rabbi Mervis, who is, if anybody who knows Rabbi Mervis, he's the nicest person you could wish to meet. He is a sweet man. He is a genuine person, and he is very much like Aaron HaKohen. He's somebody who loves the whole of Klal Yisrael. He had a filmed conversation with a guy called Johnny Benjamin, who has just received an MBE for services to mental health. He's highlighted mental health issues in the Jewish community and worked very hard for it and been recognized for it. Rabbi Mervis had a conversation with him, which was filmed and put out as a 30-minute video. In the first 2 minutes of the video, Rabbi Mervis says to Johnny Benjamin, you know that mental illness is something which has been with us for a long time. Many of our hero characters in the Bible suffered from mental illness, such as Jacob, King Saul, King David, Eov, Job, Jonah. All these people suffered from mental illness, and we should not shy away from speaking about this. And he was doing this obviously to highlight the stigma that still exists around mental illness. Now, shortly after this was released, a statement was released by a man called Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch, who is one of the Dayanim of the Eidah Charedit, of the Haredi Bet Din in Jerusalem. He has connections to England. He's a relative of Diane Ehrentraum. Let me show you what he said. Hang on a sec. This is what he said. Okay. I don't know if you can see this, but I'll read it to you. Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch, Chief Rabbi of the Orthodox Rabbinical Courts in Jerusalem, Rosh HaYeshiva of Ramat Bet Shemesh. To my brothers, the residents of England, I was deeply shocked to hear the blasphemous statements made by the Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis. He spoke arrogantly and contemptuously about our holy forefathers and holy prophets, Yaakov Avinu, David HaMelech, Shaul HaMelech, Eov, Yonah, and other leaders and prophets of the nation. It is beyond imagination that anyone could utter such statements, but due to our many sins, no voice of protest has been heard. Blah, blah, blah. His statements are a direct continuation of the views espoused by the Maskilim, who interpreted biblical events on the thoughts of simple people, etc., etc. I am hereby fulfilling the duty to protest and to declare that the aforementioned rabbi does not belong to the Torah observant public, and all his statements are null and void and of themselves. Rabbi Sternbuch basically calls Rabbi Mervis a heretic and takes away from him the title of being a shomer mitzvot. It's an utter disgrace. He calls him arrogant. There is nobody who is less arrogant than Rabbi Mervis in his position as chief rabbi. It's an absolute disgrace, this letter. And many of you, David Marks is a fairly newcomer to our shiurim, but those of you who've been coming for the last, 5-6 years will have heard me discuss the idea of the Oliver Cromwell Judaism that we have. Oliver Cromwell, of course, famously was told his portrait maker to paint him warts and all. there was to be no whitewash, and that's the way that's the way the Torah presents our heroes. And as I've said many times in the past, we can learn not only from how people behave well, but also when people make mistakes, we learn from their mistakes how not to do it. If you look at what Rabbi Mervis said, Yaakov Avinu suffered from depression. We know that because he had 22 years where he did not have a nevuah after Yosef was taken away from him. That was depression. That's mental illness.
Worse than death.
Yeah. David HaMelech. You only have to read Tehillim. Mima makim karaticha. From the depths I call to you, Hashem. That is the depths of depression. Shaul HaMelech. He was a paranoid schizophrenic. We'll come to that in the next Sefer when we look at Shmuel. He was.
What about the Belzer Rebbe yesterday at the wedding? Did you see him?
I didn't see him. No.
I saw him with those nitwits. They're a bunch of nitwits. They're living in the 17th century. They're not moving forward with the time. They don't even know that they dress up as their persecutors and slaughterers. As
okay. We're getting off the subject a bit there. But the point here is that all of the things that Rabbi Mervis said, Eov is another one. Eov, depression. I mean, who wouldn't be depressed if anybody who's read the book of Eov, what he had to go through, Nebuch. And Yonah, of course, suffered from depression. So all of those things that Rabbi Sternbuch says that Rabbi Mervis doesn't know what he's talking about is absolutely, plainly there in Tanakh for us to see. It saddens me greatly that somebody as good a person as Rabbi Mervis has to be castigated by this approach whereby everything has to be whitewashed. It does no service to anybody. It certainly does not do any service to thinking Jews. You can see behind me the banner of Tchelet, which is inspiring Judaism. That kind of approach is not inspiring. The approach of Rabbi Mervis, who's looking in an intelligent, sensitive way at our great ancestors, that's what's inspiring. And I would, I don't know how we got onto this now, but anyway.
No. How we.
It's your fault as usual.
Was the whitewashing of our biblical personalities, Johnny.
Right.
And you could argue that whoever put that nun in to make Moshe's name into Menashe was trying to whitewash the fact that Moshe did what he did. According to this Rabbi Sternbuch, what I've said over the last two sessions and what you've been saying ever since I've joined the shir has been total heresy.
They should go in and sort them out.
It would be total. Sorry.
Philip is proposing violence.
Okay.
So you're right, David, and I think the important thing here is that what you have quoted have been absolutely solid sources. There's not a single source that you have quoted which has been critical of Moshe, which Rabbi Sternbuch would not recognize as a major source. The Mechilta.
He'd say that I misinterpreted it.
Well, he probably would. That's right.
Yeah, just as he would say that there's a whole Gemara in Shabbos which talks about some of the major defects of people like Yaakov, people like David HaMelech, and that whitewashes these stories. And there's a very good reason, and maybe that's the subject of another shir another time, why these stories tend to be whitewashed. You know, Reuven didn't really sleep with his father's concubine, he just moved the bed. David HaMelech didn't commit adultery with Bathsheba. It's very, very, very interesting.
David HaMelech was Chayev Misa.
Okay.
Correct.
So we have,
and David HaMelech is punished for what happens. Reuven is punished for what happens.
I think
And I'm not espousing violence, Johnny. I just say we should go in and break a few of their glasses.
All right,
Maybe yours too.
all right. Just to wrap this up with one more thing, that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how we bring up our kids. We've all seen plenty of examples in the most modern of modern Orthodox homes where children decide to go perhaps a slightly different way to the way we brought them up. And I think it's important for us as parents, as grandparents, to continue giving them the utmost respect for what they've done, even without understanding why they've gone off the derech, not to blame ourselves for them going off the derech, but to make sure there's always a place for them at our homes, and make them feel welcome and make them feel part of our Jewish family, whatever the circumstances. And to conclude, we should only have nachas from our children and our grandchildren. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, David. Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's an excellent place to stop, giving us food for thought as well. What I would like to do is to remind you all that we will continue the next chapter with a new story of Pilegesh Begiv'ah. If you want to look it up before Sunday, it's chapter 19 of Shoftim. We'll carry on Sunday, and hopefully get through that story in a couple of weeks, and then we'll move on to a bit of pre-Yomim Noraim stuff. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Kabbalat Shabbat is on Zoom tomorrow, and all the usual shiurim for next week.
Could I ask